and good evening. It's December 5th, 2023. Tonight, we're starting another collection of discussions in our Outside the Class series. It's another series from Tim Mackie, and what's called Eat This Book. Well, that sounded interesting to me from the beginning. On TheDustyFeet.com, in the Outside the Class section, we have the Eat This Book source video selection set up for review. Because the purpose of Outside the Class is for you to listen to the in-class lecture first. That would be in the source video playlist. Because of this way of doing things, you can watch the video before we begin chatting. We still hope to keep these to around 15 to 20 minutes or so, because we'll make them easy to catch and easier to catch up on. So we're going to start our Eat the Book series with God Brings Blessing Out of Curse. And this is just part one, Outside the Class on the Dusty Feet. And before we forget, if you find these kind of podcasts useful, then that's when you click the subscribe button. The reminders, they just help you. But also, you think these might be useful to others, when you click the like button, because that is the way that YouTube chooses to share these to more people if they wish. So, eat this book. God Brings Blessing Out of Curse. Okay, so as you noticed from the video, this was from a few years ago. 10 to be more precise. So Tim's hair is much darker for sure. Looks a bit younger. Now we can move on. So Tim mentions two things at the beginning, at the church he's at, right? A challenge and a goal. Because there are two different things for sure with Eat This Book. Because the challenge is to read the Bible in 1 year. That's not the goal. The goal was to open the book every day, to develop a habit. Not just as individuals, but as a community of believers, allowing the scriptures to shape us. You know, Tim emphasizes the point that the challenge is good, but the goal, that's the value. So don't be discouraged if you miss a day. Just pick up again. Move on. It'll be there when you pick it up. But we want to become a people of character, of wisdom, of joy. We want to be grounded in the story of what God is doing in the world today. So I'm a bit torn on the signing up part, to be honest, right? Probably that's just mostly tainted from my prior church experiences. Because I get that. For today's time, it'll probably just put you on a mailing list. But I've become more and more compelled by maybe a smaller accountability. Maybe find one or two or even three folks that you can connect with and are on the same challenge and same goal. Look to find those that are ones that you can move along with, not get trapped by. It's not guilt, it's growth. And for the most part, just pick a version, any translation. Start reading. But you might, as you grow, expect more from a translation, right? Tim likes the ESV, and he emphasized a study Bible. I don't agree here very much. I'm an NASB fan. But the important part is to start. The point is to pick one and start from there. Because Tim mentions it's going to be weird for many, especially if 1, you're new to the book. 2, you've not actually read it yourself. You've only been told about it, and then only certain sections. Or 3, you decided to read it because you thought you knew what it said already anyways. But as you're reading, you find out that a lot of questions keep coming up. But I promise I don't do that often. but I promise that if you try and read it like it was new, you will end up asking a lot of questions. I know for me, I like to try and see things maybe new at times. Maybe a bit more of, I didn't think of it that way until just now. Because maybe something else you've read or something else you've heard is all of a sudden going to make you look at the text a bit differently, maybe a whole new way. Study Bibles, they tend to offer more resources, more references to help with some stuff, right? But here's where I like to interject a small word of caution, at least something that I believe is worth considering. I tend to phrase it backward interjected theology, right? Tendency to have a theological bias already, right? We were developed, and then we like to use it. Or we like to fill in our own blanks. Or even worse, as we read, dismiss text entirely because it just didn't suit our thought. But even study Bibles are subject to this, the choice of an English word to suit a theological thought, right? When sifting through the possible word choices. Because there's still some possible bias in some referenced thoughts. I just want you to be aware. Translations, each inherently in today's world, have to be different. Also that copyright thing. But as you've heard here in the Dusty Feet, more than a few times, that I might have a differing opinion on how sections of Scripture are viewed in the context of things. The when written, the to whom, the for what. So as we move to this eating more of this book, we are at times going to be discussing differing thoughts, another way to look at it. But we don't want to be overlaying a backwards thought on the past, because we really want to be looking at the whole story in the direction it's being lived and read or heard. Tim used the phrase, don't go it alone, right? Even with the use of a study Bible and not just the plain text versions. I want to amend that a bit, that don't read or study alone if at all possible. I know for many it's not possible, but try as best you can to study along with at least one other person. You know, in the advantage of today's world, unlike the past, that person, they could be literally across the globe. But I wholeheartedly believe that the Scriptures are meant to be a communal food, as it were, right, at the banquet table. We are meant to consume it as a community. We're meant to ask questions, to discuss those questions, to hear others' questions, to hear others' thoughts. So, side note, if you do have any questions for me at all, always feel free to send an email to bob@TheDustyFeet.com. It's a safe space to ask any question you wish. I will always do my best to respond. I can't always promise an answer, but I will respond. You can leave it in the comments below too, but maybe that's just a bit harder given the size of a potential audience. Because we're talking about the ease of smaller communal connections. Okay, I can be brutally honest here. There's a very good chance that the majority of those listening are neither Hebrew or Greek scholars, much less versed in language structure analysis and the historical context of much of Scripture. But I'm going to be even more brutally honest. Neither am I. I do study a bit more of the English influences on the original Hebrew and Greek texts. I've studied a bit of the Hebrew history and late Greek, early Roman history. And I do have a rather intense language structure analysis course, thanks to my earlier military history. It's a longer story there. but I'm still a simpleton in so much. I always need to learn more. So I do trust some very valuable, at least to me, teachers that are more skilled in these areas. Tim Mackie, of course, Rabbi David Foreman, and Skip Moen, just name a few. These are men who I trust with the studies that they've had and the perspectives that they see. And as you know, there are times when the three of them aren't going to agree on a topic or two. But like I said, this is a communal food table. So discussion, respect, humility are part of the expectations here. The table manners. As for Bibles, to be honest, for me, I'm very comfortable with soft copies. I personally use phones, tablets, computers for the vast majority of my reading and study. However, I totally understand the folks that are hard copy all the way. They want a personal hard copy for themselves. I support that fully. But as a context kind of guy, I do tend to remind folks that having a personal copy of the scriptures, any Bible of choice, is a relatively new ability, really. You know, books were not even mass printed, and by mass, I mean multi-print repeatable, not as in large numbers, right? But that didn't happen until the late 1400s, early 1500s. And that Bible? That was printed in Latin. I'm not sure the majority of people were too well versed in Latin. The King James Bible, that was attached to every English-speaking pulpit, right, in church. That wasn't available until the early 1600s. And that would have been in Old English. So if you can understand the original Shakespeare, then that version would very much work for you. But the truth is that most folks only heard the Bible. It was read to them. That was easily until the late 1800s, early 1900s. You know, with families, they eventually got their hard copy. They had their heirloom Bibles, and it ended up containing much of family history and such, the ancestry. You know, the truth is, all that was just said is just to make a point that our abilities are relatively, really new, right? And we've not even discussed the context for many of those as well. We might like to use the phrase, we have the right to our Bible, our leather-bound tomes. But I'm not so sure that's always been the case for very long. Because much less I'd expect those folks hundreds of years before to have understood what we think we know today because we have our own leather-bound tomes. Because for most of the folks in history, I might even go so far as to say the vast majority only heard an oral version, as in what was told or read to them, probably often with lessons taught afterwards. They then pass it down to many others that they followed, sharing the best that they knew how that had been shared to them. So, might be nice to cut them a little slack, right? The masses in the past, for sure. Because they were told and taught what they were told and taught. Sounds redundant. Seems it needs to be. We're at a wonderful time in history where we have access to so much was not available or deprived from for so many for so long. So we get to eat this book. As we open the book, we get to the beginning of the book, Genesis 1:1. This will introduce us to the first 5 scrolls or the books of the Bible. We call it Torah. The Torah is from Hebrew tradition, right? The Torah merely means teaching or instruction. and it's extremely appropriate for these 5. Then Tim introduced us to Stanley Milgram, right? That guy, through a research study that he did in the 60s, that's when I was born, it gave us today what we call the 6 degrees of separation. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that phrase or the study, but it's very important in the way we view social and communal connections today. In the video, I loved the graphic he had, but more to the point that many are going to struggle with it because the larger the world gets, the smaller the world gets. Because another later study, I think that was completed around 2012 or so, that reduced that number to 4.75. So, we're connected, but are we communal? Listen again. We are connected, but are we communal? Because it might get a bit messy here and maybe ugly. Does my life, do my actions affect that same group? Because the inference is that it does. So what we're doing here is really actually communal, whether we intend it to be or not. So maybe a different way to look at the study we're on, right? And do we want to actively impact the communal experience or passively impact the communal experience? I personally tend to lean towards the point that life with each other and with God is meant to be a communal experience. It'll be interesting as we read if we will see it that way in Scripture or not. Because the small world idea or its concept, I found it interesting that there was a time when the nuclear family, right, the core family, that was 4.5 as measured by dad, mom, and 2.5 kids. Messy picture, but you get the point. So now the degrees of separation down to 4.75 and less than that in the US, although that's probably a biased data group, one could say. That gets us in the ballpark of the same. So now we are more connected at times than even the family unit. Probably hence the blurring of lines and the crazy times we're at in 2023. Tim brings up a point that might stretch us a bit, right? And we're going to struggle with it, but I do tend to agree that this still could be very much also a biblical concept, at least in the original design, the original intentional design. So with that, we're going to begin exploring the early chapters of Genesis. We will be discussing what Tim brings up, and probably, actually, rather most definitely, we're going to bring up some additional questions that we find we need to ponder. It's entirely possible that we're not going to answer all of them. Most likely not, I think. But we will get in the habit, and this is one that is in addition to the reading habit, of asking questions. And then maybe also in there realizing, one, is it a pertinent question? Two, is this scripture book meant to answer that question? Let's be honest. The Bible will not answer all questions for sure. But then again, was never designed to. This should be a very fun series. Lots of questions, hopefully a few answers, and also hopefully a few eye-opening moments as well. Eat this book. Might have a few flavors that you didn't expect, and maybe some others that'll be quite new. So, thanks for being with us tonight as we begin this Outside the Class series with Eat This Book on the Dusty Feet.